We are now going to move into our cattle buyer panel portion of this morning's program. And so our first speaker this morning is going to be Wade Small with Agri-beef. There's Wade, I see him up. And Robert, do we have something to queue up for him? Or is he?
We don't.
We don't. Okay. Well, I'm going to turn you loose and let you go. So have at it, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Out of the way.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. So cattle market wise, I think just kind of a overview from my standpoint on a couple of the key things. One would, obviously be kind of the upcoming market. We've seen a lot of volatility, obviously, over the last 18 months. And, we were hoping that turning the page into 2021, we would start to see that change. But it looks like starting out this year, we're going to continue to see that. I think what we've seen in corn prices here recently is going to kind of change the dynamic of things and put that on top of the drought. And so I know there was a lot of calves that were held over this fall looking for a better market. A lot of calves still coming to town after the first of the year. And unfortunately, with what's happened here lately, it's not given anybody any favors. And so I think as we work through this transition here, probably through the first quarter, where we kind of have to look at new cost of gains, new corn prices, and transitioning into that, I think there's going to be a period here where the feeder cattle are still going to kind of struggle to find a bid until we probably work through that and getting into the second half of the year. If corn kind of stays where it is, we'll probably see carcass weights start to come down. As dry as it is, kind of see some fewer cow numbers. And so I think as we get into the second half of the year, hopefully some more opportunity there to see that feeder price rebound as we start to see live cattle prices increase potentially from lighter carcass weights and fewer cattle just in general on the market, hopefully. And hopefully we'll start to see some recovery in demand on the food service side of things, and hopefully kind of drive that cutout higher as we go further into the year. I think there's light at the end of the tunnel, but the tunnel might be a little bit longer than what we had anticipated, given the changes in the feed costs. I think that's the kind of big picture as I see it on the market side of things. From the production side and kind of what we're looking for on the cattle that we buy. Obviously, quality has been a big driver on the agri-beef side of things. We target cattle that'll grade, from 85 to 90% choice. We've seen huge growth in our prime demand. And so that's something that we continue to focus on as the cattle that, can still perform, grade well, and kind of keep our yield grade 4s and 5s in check. And so I think as producers look at breeding programs, they really need to tailor those into the market that they want to market their cattle to. Seen a lot of the NHTC and natural programs really gain popularity over the last few years. And so as we start to see more and more cattle shift into those program categories, I think we'll continue to see that grow over time as that becomes a bigger part of the market as well. But I think, one of the big things is just really making sure that you've got a plan in place. I mean, the market's gonna change over time. We're going to see a lot of things shift around, but a good breeding program, a good animal health program, and a consistent marketing program, will always make your calves worth more than the average calf in the country if you have those things in line, and then just always be looking for ways to add value to your calves. New technologies, new verification programs, any of those type of things that come along, to make sure that you're on top of those things and on top of the market. So, that's kind of the big picture overview from where I would see the market and where I think the industry is kind of headed over the next few years. So that's all I kind of have from the overview standpoint. I'll turn it back to you guys.
Thank you, Wade. So just please remember, stick around here. We'll have some questions and answer period after the panel gets done. Davey, I think you're up next. We're going to put Mike last on the program. So we're going to ask you to dial in here and unmute yourself and sink a spur, and I'll get out of the way.
Thank you, Barry. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and kind of concentrate more on the cow-calf operation and the grower issue. That's what we do primarily here. And we do have a cow-calf operation and a grower operation. And our grower operation is private at our facility. And we currently, with our calves that we grow from our mamas, we also put together an equal amount of calves that we buy from customers in the country and at the sale barns, and try to market them here coming up in March, April, and May. So that's what we do. And I just wanted to tell everybody that it always amazes me how resilient the livestock industry is. And every time we think that we had every issue taken care of, something else comes along. And it was COVID this last year. And there was some real panic out there when it happened. And if you remember seeing the graph here earlier with one of the earlier speakers, that graph was an extreme sharp downturn, and then it came back pretty fast. But one of the things that people were asking around May and June and April were, what's going to happen to the calf prices? So if you sold your calves on the video, you were doing really good. Because what happened was what we predicted, and it's a question that's in our panel discussion today, is the fact that calf prices in our country needs to be centered around what happens with the weather in California. And exactly what our fears would happen did, and that was they have gotten no grain, and what little they're getting now is a little bit too late. So if you were looking at the sale barns in November and December, it was pretty bleak for the calf person. So those folks that decided to go with the video did good. That created an issue though, and that was people scurrying to try to find a place to take their calves that they had to take delivery on in October and November, and what to do with those calves. And that became a real issue around our neck of the woods, and a lot of people were looking to go to commercial feedlots. So that was the big issue last year. We had COVID. We snapped out of COVID, but our fears that would have happened with or without COVID is lack of rain in California. So that is really one of the questions we have in our panel discussion, was about what dictates our calf prices, and there it is. It's rain in California. So looking at some of the issues right now that we're facing, we're looking at a good year. I don't see too much bad things to talk about. We're taking a look at what happens with the on-feed issues. The packing plants are killing as many cattle as they can right now. It was reported earlier, running full bore. And so nothing too critical. Again, our big concern is what's going to happen in the future with any more shutdowns, or what happens with the demand with beef as COVID continues. And basically, that's kind of it. I know we got a lot of questions here that are going to be asked, but that's kind of the overview from my standpoint. So Barry, next.
All right, Mike, you're going to be up next. So we'll ask you to unmute yourself. And I believe you had a PowerPoint presentation of some kind, yes?
I did not.
You did not, okay. No problem. So it's all yours. I'll back up and get out of the way.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for having me. You know, our opinion of the market right now is at the moment we're probably going to see the largest numbers that we will see all year, and it is burdensome at the moment, and we've got to figure out a way to get these cattle harvested. And the market is struggling a little bit right now with bases. Right now, the market would tell us to keep carrying the cattle and to keep making cattle larger, and we can do that to a certain degree on some of these cattle, but we can't do it on all of the cattle. So we're going to have to figure out a way to pull cattle forward and push cattle backwards. And we predominantly see that in the first quarter. We see it getting better as we get into the second quarter. And then as we go further back into the third and the fourth quarter, we see numbers getting tighter. And if you look at the board today, the board would be pricing that in both in live cattle prices and in feeder cattle prices. I think as we go further back into the year, I think the producer will probably gain more leverage, and we as a processor will probably lose less leverage going into next year. Box beef, we kind of look for the box market to probably see a high somewhere in the mid 220s on a blended basis, and we would see probably live cattle prices in the first quarter kind of chop around where they are right now. You know, on a bigger note, I think one thing with me coming from the central part of the U.S. to the west about 18 months ago, I don't think any of us realized in the East how dynamic the industry is out here as to how many cattle are on feed. And when you get past the western slope of the Rockies, I think the West has a more competitive or as competitive market as the industry does in the central plains of the United States, which was a little bit surprising to me because it doesn't get talked about, but it is a very competitive market, not only on the live cattle basis, but you know, I'm sure Wade would agree that it's a very competitive market on a feeder cattle basis as well. As far as Harris goes, I don't think it's any secret. We've pretty well changed the model. We're not necessarily just buying yearlings anymore. And, you know, we're looking for a a better animal. As Wade was talking about, we want an animal that will grade. We want that animal to grade 80% or higher. And, you know, we have the same demand for the prime cattle as our competitors do. As far as, you know, our biggest, you know, I noticed a question there about what was some of the items that was most important to us. And, you know, our biggest thing is herd health. It doesn't matter how good the animal is if we don't have herd health, and we don't have a hardy animal that'll stay healthy, because we won't be able to get the performance out of that animal in the feed yard. I think that's pretty much our overview.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all. I've got a few questions here that I'll dole out, and then we have a couple of questions that have come in from previous speakers, but I want to do these questions that are germane to the cattle buyer panel first here. So this one says, it's for Davey. How important is the big packer feeder market to our cow-calf producers in Nevada? I can read it again if you. How important is the big packer feeder market to our calf producers in Nevada?
Well, it's very important, Barry. That's ultimately who market our cattle, and that's ultimately that make sure our beef gets shipped overseas and gets distributed throughout the United States. And I think the way the question was read or written was to explain that there's a huge disconnect right now between the cow-calf operator and the big packing plant. And I think it's important that everybody understand that where our beef ultimately goes. And there's multiple sections where beef goes through the process to get finished in a boxed product and to ship to consumers. And I've always told people that you have the cow-calf operators that raise the babies, you got the growers that grow them, and then you got the finishers that finish them, and then you got the packing plants that kill them. And it's very important to understand that in that process, everybody has their own little niche to take care of that ultimately gets our product processed and marketed. And we cannot discount the big packer. And I know there's a big push out there to try to get, we'd rather have a bunch of small packing plants than a few big ones. But the reality of it is that it's really hard. If you look on the West Coast out here in California, some of our biggest plants are 14 and 1,500 head plants. And some of these big plants are 4,000 and 5,000 head a day. And it costs a lot of money to build those plants, and it costs a lot of money to keep them open. And we just need to be mindful that it's the big packers are what are marketing our beef, and it all trickles down to the cow-calf operator when they get their check from the buyer from the calves. So, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, this next question, you guys can decide who wants to answer it, or maybe all three of you want to answer it, or say a word or two. It says the double grass hay calf goes to, the double grass hay calf goes to California, but the yearlings do not. They go to feedlots. What is the best age to market them then? And how do we decide, or how do we best approach the long haul with too large of a female herd? Let me read that again. I'm not the best reader. Dyslexia kicks in bad sometimes. So the double grass hay calf goes to California, but the yearlings do not. They go to feedlots. What is the best age to market then? And how do we best approach the long haul with a too large female herd?
I
Who
think
wants to step up?
I can try. So,
Okay, wait.
you know, on the marketing window, I mean, a lot of that is going to be dependent upon, you know, that cow calf producer and just the economics behind their operations. I mean, if generally, if you've got the resources to put more pounds on the cattle and you can handle them all the way through and sell them as a yearling, if that works into your operation, you know, I think that that's generally the more profitable thing to do. If you don't have the resources to be able to do that, then, you know, you're going to generate the highest price on those calves if they're going to get that 2-season California market, in the years where there's grass, at least. But you know, I think that a lot of that is just dependent upon the operations, and so I think that's where a lot of guys, a lot of cow calf operations, you know, if they can really know their cost of production and know what their options and resources are, then it's just kind of the, you know, doing the math on the economics of what works best for their specific operation. I'm not sure on the, you know, on the female side, what, if you have any more insight on what that was or clarification on that question. But as far as when to market the cattle, you know, I think it just comes down to economics and what they have the resources to do.
Every operation is different.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Barry, I'll go ahead and weigh in just real quick.
Go ahead.
Wade is exactly right. If you can raise those calves to yearling size and you have the facilities, go do it. I think the issue when I gave my original presentation was that we rely on California to get them to yearlings. Always have. We're in a tough situation in our state. We're speaking directly to Nevada producers. And when you talk about the basis on the board in Chicago, it hits directly with the state of Nevada. We have issues with getting the feed and enough feed to do it and the right cost to do it, and the processing. So our family has learned how to switch from grass, the old days of sending our calves to grass and raising them into yearlings dried up when we went to $3 calves. The grass got so expensive, but we figured out a way to raise our calves in our feedlot utilizing about 3 people in a 2,500 head feedlot to put the weight on those calves to get them to 900 pounds. But that was part of what I was trying to discuss is when you have calves, we rely on the California market because not having that grain and that cheap feed, we need that grass to grow those calves into yearlings. So it's really important. And again, piggybacking on Wade, it depends on the producer and what they can do. I know a lot of producers that are still looking at change to keeping their calves a little longer because they do have the feed and the ability to feed them. And some producers just do not have that ability. They've got to sell their calves shortly after weaning. So, and I don't understand the cow part either in that question. So might have to get some clarification.
Yeah, if we can get a little clarification, whomever sent the question in, if you could clarify that, we'll try and get an answer for you. Mike, you have to unmute yourself, Mike.
Sorry, I thought I had.
There you go.
The only thing that I would add to that is I think even if you have feed, I think another part of that equation is dollars per head. And, you know, at whatever weight you're going to get the most dollars per head should tell you when you should should try to market those animals. Just because you have more feed and you're going to hold those animals longer, if you're going to have the same dollars per head, you may be just as advantageous to mark them at a smaller weight than a larger weight. So I think, to me, it comes down to dollars per head.
Okay, that's always good advice. I've got a question here about Mormon crickets. We've got the questioner runs a small growing operation, and the crickets hit them pretty hard. And so the question is, did Mormon crickets, can you tell us if Mormon cricket infestations this last year in Nevada affected the prices or operation costs for larger operations? Any personal experience with that?
Well, Barry, we have, if you know that northern country, north of Reno, we have a grazing permit there. It was pretty bad, if you remember, 10 or 12 years ago. But I just can't right now. I know people are feeling the effects worse than others, but I don't have any insight.
I do know this, that the Mormon cricket infestation, at least from my standpoint, just observational, they haven't been as bad as they were 12 years ago, 15 years ago, where they were much more widespread and much more concentrated over a broader area. It wasn't as spotty. I mean, everybody got hit, 12 few years ago. I don't know, it might have been 15 years ago now, I can't remember. But they were, when they were salting the road over Austin Summit and New Pass, when they were sanding the road to keep people on the road. So the damage this past year, I think, was a little more spotty, depending on where you were in the state. And so maybe that had some overall effect, but it's probably pretty minimal once you averaged it over the entire hay producing area. The follow-up on that last question is this: are mother cow herds too large in Nevada? What do you think about that? Are mother cow herds too large in Nevada right now?
That's a loaded question.
Yeah, somebody grab a root and pull there.
That's a loaded question. We've come out of 4 good years of grazing in Nevada. And I don't say, and I love the lady that gave the presentation on the weather. It's like predicting the cow prices or the calf prices. It's, wherever it ends up being, that's what it'll be. And if we continue to have this drought, you're going to see more cows go on the market. But it's dictated by Mother Nature and the market. This last summer, it was probably fine. This coming spring, there may be too many cows out there, but we'll just have to see what happens with Mother Nature and the market. That drives it. That's my feelings.
And there's always this issue of genetics too. You develop, genetics for 30 years on your outfit, and then suddenly something happens, and you're always going to be hesitant to cut too far into that. So there's all kinds of things that could be used to make that decision. So here's one: do we grow pounds or number of calves? What do we actually grow?
That's easy. Pounds.
It goes back to what I was talking about earlier.
Mike talked about it, Barry, and he's exactly right. I'm completely amazed. Last year at this time, we couldn't get the money we wanted on our 9-weight calves. So we sent them all over the country, back to the Midwest, Colorado, and fed them. And I was completely amazed. my father couldn't believe it that what we're doing nowadays. And if we want to talk about the kind of cattle, and I see some questions here about color, and we want to get into that, we can give some real insight of the crossbreds and why they're so much cheaper at the sale barns. But I couldn't believe it when we were seeing 15 to 1,700 pound steers. That's what their killing weights were. So it's crazy. And everybody's seen the statistics of how much more beef we're producing with less carcasses. And the same thing with the milk industry. We don't want to leave them out. Earlier there, some stats on them, but producing more milk with less cows and more meat with less animals.
I've got one more question here, and then I want to circle back to what you were talking about there, Davey. But let's get this one answered. In general, is there a best and worst time of year to market feeder calves?
I think it's always the toughest on, October 15th on the West Coast or the Northwest, and all the calves are coming to town. I mean, that's definitely if you're going to sell them as calves, definitely the toughest time to market, especially an unweaned calf on, October 15th, which is when the bulk of them get marketed. And so, a lot of times, like I say, and it does come back to your resources again, but whatever you can do to kind of differentiate from that and stay out of those time frames. And there's obviously on the fed cattle side of things, we see the spring highs and we see the summer lows, and obviously that has to do with the cattle supply, and there's a big price differentiation in those time frames, but there's also a cost to get them there. And so just because it's the highest price you're going to sell one for doesn't always mean that it's going to be the most profitable time to sell them to. So once again, just economics. I mean, I think that's the big thing that a lot of producers need to do is know what their costs are, know what they want to sell their cattle for, what their goal is to get out of their cattle from a profitability standpoint, and stick to that plan that makes the most sense.
Right. I'm going to circle back to something that Davey was alluding to just a moment ago, and that is the hot commodity. What's the hottest, slickest thing that's going on right now? Is it black cattle? Is it red cattle, white face, eared cattle, non-eared cattle? What's the deal? That's a hot potato too.
Okay, I want Wade and Mike to weigh in on this, but here's what we've found. I talked a little bit yesterday during our pre-warm-up that my father believes that there's value in every kind of cow out there, every kind of animal. And we have tried it. Let me tell you, when you go to the sale barns, and the sale barns are loaded up with the team ropers that are selling their roping steers, and you see what price those team roping steers are bringing, boom, they get bought. We've tried it. We've also marketed merchandised crossbred cattle separately from the European bred cattle, and had a niche market where they could go to. But let me tell you, it's just what I told you earlier about what cattle can do with less than 2 years of age, what a European bred animal like a Black Angus can do in less than 2 years. And we've fed cattle like roping steers, Longhorns, Corianis, and we've fed crossbred cattle. And when it comes to putting the pounds on and doing it for the least amount of money to get those pounds on, it will be those little black spots that are behind you, Barry. And I don't think those are buffalo back there. So it's just that's the way it is. And I wish more people would come to the sale barns and watch their cattle go through the sale and see what happens. We understand all of that. We understand that when you're running out in the Nevada chaparral on BLM permits, some people are afraid that the black cattle and the red cattle aren't as robust. But we're seeing market trends from 20 to 30 cents cheaper for a crossbred animal than we do a black or a red. So those are the things you got to realize, but that's where it's coming down to is you can put a lot of money in these off-breed cattle, feeding them to get them to market, and it can get very expensive. So that's my input.
Anybody else want to take it on? Mike, Wade?
You know, I mean, I think it, once again, is just, you know, good breeding program when you're trying to breed cattle that, you know, for us that are going to meet what our market is. And so breed wise isn't as big a deal if the cattle meet the criteria. I mean, there's a lot of breeds that don't, but you know, there's good cattle in a lot of those breeds. And so finding the cattle that fit the program, that fit your program, and having some consistency there and knowing what your cattle do. I mean, that's the big thing, is knowing, and I know it's not easy for everybody. They don't have the resources, but knowing what the genetics are behind the cattle so that you have that when you do want to market them, or having some historical data on what the cattle can do is important, and sticking with the program. I mean, I do think some things like where you said there, you know, what's the hot breed, or what's the trend. You know, sometimes when you get stuck chasing trends, you're always one step behind. And so, you know, I see producers that have tried everything under the sun, and, you know, their comment is, well, nothing works. And, you know, generally my advice is, why don't you try the same thing twice and then decide if it works or not. And so, you see guys that are successful, that do market their cattle well. They have a program, they have a history, and they're good at marketing that, and they can stand behind their cattle. And so, just being realistic, I guess, if you are going to run some of these crossbred cattle, if that's what works better. I mean, if you need to run some eared cattle and because you're in rougher country, be realistic in what they're going to bring, right? So you just have to figure that in on when you're figuring what your sell price is going to be. Know that they're going to be a discount, and so just having a good program all the way through is something that I think benefits everybody.
Mike, anything?
The hot commodity is 80% Charolais better, and it yields 63.5. That's the hot commodity. I mean, it's pretty simple. I mean, you've heard two of us today say that we want cattle to grade 80% or better, and we need those cattle to yield 63.5. And you've heard Davey say that, in another way, high is not always high and cheap is not always cheap whenever you start looking at the performance and the economics that comes along with that performance in the feed yard. So, you know, we have some color breed programs, but at the end of the day, the American consumer has changed their palate, and they want high quality beef. And even through COVID, with restaurants being closed down and high-end restaurants being closed down, we found that the consumer wanted that same experience at home. And they went to different places and different outlets to find the product, the equipment to cook it, and have even gone to different major retailers of appliances and cooking utensils and all, and learned how to create that experience at home. And I would agree with Wade, is never try to chase a fad. Just have a good, sound foundation in genetics that will do exactly what I just said. Grade well and yield well.
Yeah. And I throw my 2 cents in. I don't know anything about cows. I just look at it from a range standpoint. And the average weight of, or the weight of the average Angus cow in the United States now is approaching 1,500 pounds if it isn't over that. And running a bunch of 1,500-pound cows out here in the middle of Nevada just doesn't seem to work in my head anyway. I'd rather have 3 critters that weighed 900 pounds than 2 of them that weighed 300 pounds or 3,000 pounds. So there's always that aspect of it as well. And that brings back to what everybody always, falls back to it, and Wade expressed it really well. Everybody's operation is different. Everybody's operation is different, and you have to make it work on your operation. And if that, you just have to be realistic about what your product is going to be at the end. And if you do that, you're going to be okay, because that means you're actually managing something. So I've got one more question that was just handed me. What are your thoughts on Texas Longhorn Charolais cross? Those were my thoughts. What are your thoughts on Texas Longhorn Charolais cross? We are currently finding them very hardy. They graze easy, low maintenance. The other farm and I that work together are new at this cross. You guys have any comments on Charolais Texas Longhorn crosses for Nevada?
If we can feed them for 120 days and get 500 pounds on them, 300 pounds, it'll be great. And if we can get them to yield, that's great. But we've tried it, and that's just what I said earlier. It's the genetics and having those European bred cattle put the groceries away, and they convert it brilliantly. So that's where it's at. Your buyer, the people that are raising those animals, need to pay attention to their buyers and what the trend is. And you just need to pay attention, because the buyer will tell you a lot about what you're raising and will it work or not.
Of course, you're talking about general markets too. We're not talking about niche markets or any value-added type things, really. We're just talking about general marketing trends anyway. So another question: can a producer get harvest data from Harris?
If they feed them with us.
There you go. That's the answer. If you feed your critters with them, you can get data from them. Okay. I have a couple of questions here for that we backed up from some of our previous speakers. We'll get through these and then we'll do our poll. This one is for Malika. Malika, you still with us? I see you. You're
I'm here. Yeah.
Sort of on the screen there. Okay, great. This is for you. Any ideas with I probably should ask the other one first. Do you have any ideas with the new administration and the potential trade changes with China and what those impacts may be to the Nevada agricultural economy?
I I'd seen this pop up before, and I had thought about it. I think that the new administration is going to be a little less protectionistic, maybe. I don't know if that's the right word. Yeah, it'd be a little bit less protectionistic than the current administration. So I suspect we will see a move away from the level of tariffs and bilateral trade agreements, maybe moving back to a regime that looked more like 2 administrations back, since he was from that administration. So I think that, pros and cons to both protecting, having more of a nationalistic versus like global trade. Some producers did have, like I showed the soybean slide earlier, the soybean farmers got hit really hard with the retaliatory tariffs from China. So if we're not putting tariffs out, maybe they won't either. We'll see. I also talked about how China is, their purchasing patterns over or since COVID have really been driven more by their internal demand and what they need to meet their needs rather than by the phase one agreement. And they had actually have kind of foregone some of their out of quota tariffs in order to get the commodities that they need for their production. Through the last couple of years, for a number of reasons, farm income has been at a higher than average over the last 10 or 15 years because of government payments. So there's been a lot of payments that have gone for COVID to offset the trade impacts, like the soybean, and then of course, natural disasters. So I'd say if there's not trade tools being implemented, we might not see some of those farm payments, but what the lag on that is, your guess is as good as mine. And then in terms of how that goes back to Nevada, I just think right now, till we get out of COVID, it's going to be hard to disassemble any of that, and COVID's going to have a much larger impact on the price of cattle than any trade, whether it's our next door neighbors or China. It doesn't matter. I think COVID's really gonna drive that. That was a long-winded answer of saying I'm not quite sure, but I think more than anything, we're gonna move towards using less market tools like tariffs and stuff under the new administration.
That's a good answer. I mean, unless you're on the transition team, or unless they have made public statements, nobody knows really what's going on. But I think certainly COVID is going to, in the immediate future, COVID is certainly probably something that's going to be affect things here in Nevada more so than any national wash that might go on. This question is for Shannon. Shannon, you still with us? I'm looking at my screen here. Okay, great. It says, you may have to remember this from a while back. I see you have tourism increasing and impacting cattle prices. However, tourism experts expect family tourism to increase, but convention traffic to stay at a lower level given the use of Zoom. How will this change in tourism impact, or how will this change the tourism impact on cattle prices? Any ideas?
I would build on what Michaelia said, and she mentioned countries, China and others, but also one of our major trading partners is Mexico. And if you look at dairy, you look at other commodities, and particularly beef, you look at Mexico as a leading destination. And my comment on tourism is the recovery of Mexico, Mexico's tourism and Mexico's oil industry. We had a couple comments on oil too. Those two factors are going to help their economy recover, and that in turn should support beef exports. And that's what derived that.
Okay. That ends our question and answer period, I believe. So we're going to run our poll now. If Robert can queue up our poll for our evaluation, we'll get that done. There are 3 questions on this, if you haven't done this one before. So make sure that you answer that 3rd question. You'll have to scroll down to get to that 3rd question. But if you would please do that now, we would appreciate it very much. We'll give you a little bit here to get that done. This is very, very important information for us. It's something that we really take a good hard look at each time we get this this information. So, and I can see if you're just squirreling out on me too. So be sure you feel that you punch those buttons and and make your voice be heard. This is almost like a romper room in some ways. Okay. I think Robert's going to give you just a couple more seconds here to get this done. Okay. Great. Okay, that concludes our morning session of the second day. So we will cut you loose for now, and we'll be back here in about an hour, 45 minutes. So we will see you here shortly with our rangeland ecology segment.